Some families project a flawless image to the outside world. They are the families, with bright smiles and photographs, seemingly effortless, holiday dinners, and cherished stories passed down through generations. But then there are families like the Guthries, where the true narrative isn't found in the words shared, but in everything carefully and deliberately left unspoken. Nancy and Anna Guthrie. Two women, bound by blood. Their relationship was so layered with complexity, prolonged silence, and buried feelings, that even their innermost circle couldn't grasp what was truly happening. Beneath the surface, who were they? Genuinely, were they just a mother and daughter dealing with the typical strains of domestic life, or were they two individuals bearing wounds so profound that the reality of their story was locked away for years, perhaps forever? Here is what we know for certain. Every family harbors secrets, but the Guthries' secrets were far from trivial. These weren't forgotten arguments swept under the rug. They were the kind of secrets that molded identities, shifted life decisions, and left unseen scars on everyone involved. Perhaps the most haunting aspect is that those who held pieces of the truth chose to stay silent, not out of malice, but out of love, or at least their understanding of what love demanded. So today we pull back the curtain. We step inside the quiet rooms of the Guthrie household to ask the questions that went ignored for far too long. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for your family and for yourself is to finally speak the truth out loud. This is the untold chapter of Nancy and Anna Guthrie. Imagine a quintessential small town where everyone knows your face, yet no one truly understands your life. It is the sort of place defined by front porch rocking chairs, passing waves from neighbors who never actually stop to talk, and local gossip that moves much faster than the truth. This was the environment Nancy Guthrie was raised in, and in numerous ways it was a reality she never quite broke free from. Nancy never chased the spotlight. She possessed the quiet demeanor of someone profoundly reflective, watchful, guarded, and selecting each word as if it carried a heavy price. Those acquainted with her during her youth recalled a quiet magnetism. She was rarely the most vocal presence, yet she was frequently the person who lingered in your memory long after parting. She married early, too early, as some would privately whisper, though never directly to her face. The partner she selected was reliable and industrious, the type of man who ensured the bills were paid and the cupboards were stocked. However, as Nancy would gradually realize, reliability does not equal emotional warmth, and a well-stocked kitchen cannot satisfy a starving heart. Anna was born into one of the most silent periods of Nancy's existence. A winter arrival, bitterly cold outdoors and emotionally complex. Indoors, from her earliest days, Anna appeared to shoulder a burden far beyond her age. Even key she was just a baby, guests at the Guthrie house would note. With both fondness and a hint of discomfort, that little Anna was always observing, endlessly watching, a mother and her daughter. At first glance, it reads like an entirely typical narrative. A woman raising her child, simply doing the best she could with her given circumstances. Yet, if you look closer, the fabric of their lives starts to shift. There were Nancy's deliberate silences whenever specific subjects arose. There were Anna's innocent questions, perpetually and softly steered off course. Consider the pictures resting on the mantel. Noticeable gaps, carefully cropped faces, and frames angled just slightly out of sight. An unspoken presence always inhabited their home. It wasn't inherently sinister, but rather profoundly unresolved, a lingering tension that both women navigated around for decades, never daring to confront it head-on. Ultimately, that silent weight, whatever its nature, would forge Anna's fundamental understanding of her own identity. It would compel her to hunt for answers in corners her mother never wanted her to explore. It would draw her down routes that were profoundly uncomfortable, frequently painful, but entirely, undeniably essential. This is not a tale of antagonists or pointing fingers. It is a chronicle of two women who cared for one another in the messy, flawed, and deeply human manner that families do. It is about the heavy truths that love occasionally buries, and sometimes eventually liberates. Every hidden truth traces back to an origin point. A solitary moment, an isolated choice, a single door that shuts without a sound, and remains locked forever. For the Guthrie household, that exact moment occurred long before Anna possessed the years to comprehend the world shifting around her. Nancy possessed a history long before the existence most people recognized. It might seem theatrical, but it remains the simple truth. During her early 20s, prior to the marriage, the quaint town, the front porch, and the rocking chairs, Nancy was an entirely different person. She was freer, more hesitant and vibrant, in the specific way youth are. Before they learned the necessity of caution, she experienced profound relationships that molded her. She harbored ambitions that refused to fit seamlessly into the life she ultimately embraced. And there was one defining chapter she sealed so resolutely, so intentionally, that she never breathed a word of it again, not to her husband, not to her closest confidants, and unequivocally not to Anna. Why do individuals entomb the fragments of themselves that feel too convoluted to articulate? Sometimes it stems from shame, sometimes it is sheer self-preservation, and sometimes it is the silent, agonizing conviction that the truth would inflict more damage on loved ones than silence ever could. For Nancy, it was likely a combination of all three. She was a woman who navigated her pain in absolute privacy, wearing her composure like a suit of armor, genuinely convinced, in her very core, that certain matters were best left undisturbed. Yet, the reality of buried truths is that they never truly vanish. They seep into the bedrock of a family's foundation, growing silently and obstinately in the most unforeseen directions. Anna was raised in a home where inquiries often evaporated before they could be fully voiced. This wasn't because Nancy was dismissive. She wasn't, nor was she unfeeling. She was, in her own calibrated manner, profoundly affectionate. But a distinct pattern existed. Specific topics caused the atmosphere in the room to shift. Particular names triggered something in Nancy's expression. To lock down tight, like a window slammed shut against a storm. Anna picked up on this early. Children always do. They are the most intuitive observers in any household, absorbing the exact emotions adults assume they have flawlessly concealed. By her teenage years, Anna maintained a mental ledger, never inscribed, never spoken, of subjects that were strictly off-limits. Her mother's early adulthood, certain relatives on Nancy's side, and a specific year in the mid-1970s that hovered like a void in every family narrative. Anna did not pry, at least not initially. She had inherited a fraction of her mother's cautious disposition. She observed, she listened, and she catalogued details in the recesses of her mind, simply waiting. Waiting for what exactly? She couldn't articulate, but the questions continued to multiply, because that is the nature of unaddressed inquiries. They do not fade as time passes. They compound. They weave themselves into your identity, into your understanding of your origins, and into the primal human necessity. To comprehend exactly who you are, and how you came to be. Anna Guthrie was a young woman anchored to roots she couldn't entirely visualize, and that unseen, missing fragment, silent, relentless, and unyielding, would ultimately become the defining pursuit of her adult existence. The paradigm shifted on a deceptively mundane afternoon. Anna, now in her late 20s, and establishing her own life in a different city, was home visiting her mother, when she stumbled upon something tucked away in the back of a closet. She never intended to pry into the box, an utterly unremarkable cardboard container that could have held anything, from old tax returns to holiday ornaments. Instead, this box safeguarded letters, handwritten correspondences, bound tightly with a piece of string that had grown soft and frayed over the years. Anna nearly returned them to their resting place, almost, but a name on the uppermost envelope caught her eye. A name she had never seen, penned in handwriting, that definitely did not belong to her mother. The return address, traced back to a city 3 states away. The postmark vividly read 1974. She lingered in that closet for a heavy moment, watching dust motes drift in the stillness, listening to the faint noises of her mother moving about in the kitchen below. The letters in her hands felt anchored by whatever silent weight they had carried for decades. She chose not to read them that day, carefully returning them to the exact position she had found them. Yet the phantom image of that box clung to her. It accompanied her on the long drive back to her own city, rested beside her as she drifted off to sleep, and greeted her the moment she awoke. With a quiet, undeniable certainty rising from deep within, Anna knew she would never be able to leave that question unresolved. Months slipped by. Before Anna Koi Kung Kung broached the subject with her mother, she required time to process, to determine how to pose the question without inflicting pain, and to figure out what she genuinely sought: mere facts, deeper comprehension, or something more profound and difficult to articulate, like true connection. When she ultimately asked, she kept it remarkably simple, sitting across from Nancy at the familiar kitchen table, the exact spot where they had shared thousands of unremarkable meals. She stated, "Mom, I found some letters hidden in the closet from 1974. Who was writing to you from out of state?" The heavy silence that ensued was one of the longest Anna had ever endured. Nancy did not attempt to deny it. She did not feign ignorance or confusion. She merely gazed at her daughter for an extended moment, wearing an expression Anna would later depict as someone finally dropping an unbearably heavy load. And then Nancy Bat Jiao speak. She started slowly, with pauses so stretched out that you could practically hear the house breathing around them. But she spoke. What unraveled over the subsequent hours was not a single isolated secret, but a tapestry of intertwined layers, each providing context for the next. There had been another profound relationship prior to meeting Anna's father, one significant enough that it permanently altered the trajectory of Nancy's entire existence. Real life, however, is rarely straightforward, and frequently, though not always, the truth lands with a different impact than we anticipate. For Anna, these disclosures were incredibly disorienting. There is no gentler way to phrase it. Whenever the foundational framework of your family history shifts, even marginally, the solid ground beneath your feet trembles. All at once, certain elements that had never entirely made sense, a specific underlying tension during the holidays, a strict avoidance of old photo albums, an absolute silence surrounding particular years, snapped into focus, with a clarity that felt simultaneously liberating and profoundly unsettling. Anna spent the subsequent weeks in a state of quiet internal reconciliation. She wasn't simply angry, rather, she felt like a reader who had been studying a novel with missing chapters and had suddenly, surprisingly, discovered the torn pages. She pondered the immense weight of carrying such a burden for so long. She considered the severe toll it takes on a person to harbor a secret, not just for a season, but for entire decades. To her own astonishment, she realized her dominant emotion was not resentment toward her mother, but an ache, closely resembling grief. It was a deep sorrow for the younger version of Nancy, for the agonizing choices forged under immense pressure. She grieved the decades of pervasive silence that had stealthily weighed upon both of them, without either truly comprehending its magnitude. As for Nancy, she did not instantly appear unburdened after confessing the truth. Not right away. Decades of rigorously practiced silence do not simply evaporate in a single night. However, a subtle shift emerged in her countenance. In the ensuing days, a gentle softening around the edges that Anna was uncertain she had ever witnessed before. The dynamic between the two women transformed. They conversed with more caution, yes, but with a striking new honesty. Anna began posing questions she had never previously possessed the courage to voice. It was never an interrogation, but rather a transparent curiosity, an exploration of where their relationship might have been years ago. Had this space for truth existed sooner? And Nancy responded, not all at once, and certainly not without moments of hesitation, but she answered. What materialized over those weeks and months was a portrait infinitely more intricate than the maternal figure Anna had known her whole life. Her mother was not merely a reserved woman from a quaint town who settled down to raise a family. She had been a vibrant young woman, brimming with passions, internal contradictions, and a profound capacity for love that had manifested in unanticipated ways. Ultimately, she was a woman constrained by the era she lived in, the heavy societal expectations placed upon her shoulders, yet and her own deeply ingrained instinct to shield those she cared about, even if it meant sacrificing the entirety of her own narrative. There is something simultaneously agonizing and beautiful about encountering your parent as a fully realized human being. It represents a distinct phase of coming of age that occurs not during adolescence but deep within, the complicated, messy middle of adult life. The man Nancy had hidden away in her silence was still breathing. He was now in his 80s, living a quiet existence with a family of his own, an entire lifetime constructed in the void, where Nancy's silence had firmly locked a door. Anna discovered his identity by reading the letters. She refrained from searching for him right away. Instead, she sat with this new reality for a time, deeply feeling its heavy weight, knowing that her next steps carried significant consequences, not merely for herself, but for individuals. Completely unaware that this fragile thread existed, she turned to her mother. They shared long, meticulously careful conversations. Nancy wasn't against Anna knowing the truth, yet she harbored a deep fear. It was a distinct type of fear, born not of guilt, but from the sharp realization that dragging the past back into the present creates unpredictable ripple effects. "I am not ashamed of what took place," Nancy confided in Anna during one of their talks. "I need you to grasp that. While I held on to shame for years, I no longer do. I am simply being cautious about what this means for everyone involved." That crucial distinction resonated profoundly with Anna. Nancy was not weighed down by disgrace. She was burdened by consideration. Even decades later, she was actively worrying about the collateral damage to the people she once cherished and the family she had subsequently built. This enduring, quiet thoughtfulness, even when it had disguised itself as silence, was not something Anna felt she could reject or judge. She began to comprehend that this was, in fact, the defining characteristic of the mother who raised her. Ultimately, Anna chose not to contact the man from the hidden letters. Following extensive reflection and profound dialogues with both her mother and her own conscience, she concluded that simply knowing the truth was sufficient. Sometimes discovering a secret doesn't obligate you to unravel every single thread connected to it. True wisdom often lies in discerning which doors to swing open and which to gently leave shut, choosing understanding over blind ignorance. What she walked away with was not a neatly resolved narrative with a flawless conclusion, as families rarely provide such perfect endings. Instead, she gained a richer, far more authentic comprehension of her mother, and consequently a truer understanding of herself. She finally saw the origins of certain traits within her own character, her innate quietness, her habit of processing emotions internally, and her fierce instinct to shield her loved ones, even at the cost of total transparency, all made sense. She had inherited far more than Nancy's physical features, or the way she tilted her head in thought. Anna had inherited an entire emotional architecture, a framework she could now clearly perceive and navigate with deliberate intention. The Guthrie saga did not conclude with a theatrical explosion or a public confrontation. It culminated, or rather, it evolved, with two women sitting face to face at a kitchen table, conversing with unprecedented honesty. They discovered each other not as the two-dimensional archetypes of mother and daughter, but as complex, flawed, and beautifully loving individuals. And that quiet intimacy was absolutely everything. There is a distinct reason tales like Nancy and Anna's linger in our minds long after the screen fades to black. It isn't because their circumstances are extraordinarily unique. It is precisely because they are undeniably common. Almost every family possesses their own version of that hidden closet box. There are always undiscussed letters, skipped over eras, and heavy questions, hovering silently over holiday dinners, perpetually unasked. The majority of us have stood squarely in Anna's shoes, feeling the magnetic pull of an unresolved mystery, calculating the heavy cost of asking and wondering if the naked truth will draw our loved ones closer or drive a wedge between us. What the story gently proposes, without forcing a lesson, is that honesty, even why it is agonizingly difficult, eventually clears a space for a much deeper caliber of love. It doesn't happen instantaneously or without intense discomfort, but it does happen if their journey moved you or prompted you to reflect on your own family's silences and lingering questions. It is by no means an accident. That is the entire purpose. We recount these histories, not to exploit or sensationalize, but to hold up a mirror. They remind us that the people we cherish are vastly more complex than the simplified versions we grew up believing, and sometimes the most profoundly courageous act we can perform for them and for our own peace of mind is simply to ask. If this narrative resonated with your soul, please share it with someone who might need to hear its message. And if you harbor your own untold story or carry your own unanswered questions, perhaps today is the day you koi kung kung summon the courage to ask them.